Hi, I'm Dr. Mary Salcedo here with Lean, Agile, and Academia webinar part 2, here with Agile coach Doug Salcedo. Take it away, Doug.
Hi, and welcome back, everybody. We're in part 2. We're going to be picking up where we left off. We're going to talk about how you do work breakdown in Agile. We'll take a look at actual work practices. In the first part 1, we talked a lot about values and principles, the why of Lean, the why of Agile. We're going to get more into the doing, the hows. And then we're going to finish up with looking at some academic research on Agile research and show you, one, it's being done successfully, some of the caveats, some of the findings that people are coming out with, and then point you to a really good, I think, bibliography to complete or continue your learning journey. So let's take a look very quickly at some of what we covered in part 1. That's me, of course. And we talked about waterfall approaches versus agile Scrum approaches, and where waterfall would have you go through requirements, design, implementation, verification. What we call that is kind of like big upfront design, BUFD, and you'll hear that referred to. But the idea is that you think you know what the end is when you start, and actually you don't, because the learning's always in the doing. And you are focused on producing something big at the end that conforms to the requirements, which, by the way, many times, at least in industry, it's a guess, it's a hypothesis. We talked about that. And so Agile attempts to be transparent about that and say, we're going to start off with lightweight requirements in design, and then iteratively, we're going to produce things that validate the design and the requirements, or suggest that we should pivot and to move to something else. And we iteratively build more value and document it as we go, and more value until we arrive at the end event, whether it be publishing a paper or an application. But the thing is, what we produce is much more tuned to what's needed rather than what was specified. And that's one of the key things in Agile, is that we're trying to optimize the value of what we've done. Now, applying that to a doctoral research process, where we have the problem, the goals, subproblems, hypotheses, organizing data, interpret that data, and try to resolve against the problem statement. Remember, there's a lot of learning going on here, and so it looks a lot like waterfall. The planning, the study, literature review, you've seen all this before, implement, studying, gather data, analysis, interpretation, and reporting. And this also can be a waterfall type process. But as we go through this, what we want to do is open up your mind to doing this as an iterative process. You're still going to be doing the same things, but you're going to be doing it in kind of like a aim small, miss small kind of a fashion, in an iterative type of an approach, where focus becomes a good thing. Fewer things on your plate at any one time become a better thing. And not only do you end up with a better result, but you end up with a more sustainable process in the process. So Lean, as we talk about Lean Agile or Lean-Agile, where sustainable delivery of value is the goal. And we go on to say that the goal is to deliver that maximum customer value in the shortest sustainable lead time, while providing the highest possible quality to customers and society as a whole. Going further, one more statement is that since people do all the work, your scopes don't do the work, your lab doesn't do the work, your computer doesn't do the work, people do the work. And so having high team morale, safety, and customer delight are additional goals and benefits of Lean. And when we start breaking that down into a process, it's about understanding what is the value, and then how do we produce that value, and we call that the value stream. And then when we work on creating a flow, moving things from left to right, from idea to delivery. And what we want to do is pull work through by establishing what we call work and process limits, so that we don't put more on our plate than we can eat. And when we try to put more on our plate when we eat, it falls off, it doesn't look good, it doesn't taste good. And so we want to do a pull process where we have, if a 7-course meal, we're going to pull one thing on, eat it, pull another thing, eat it. And that's kind of how we do it. And then seek perfection, which is we want to look at eliminating waste. First of all, don't take and put on more on your plate than you can chew. But also, a lot of times we're waiting for things. We see delays, we see bottlenecks, we see miscommunications, we see poor handoffs. We see things that don't need to be done, that they really don't add to the end value. And so that 5th step of seek perfection, then you just kind of like keep rotating around it. And that's what Lean is about. We talked about the Agile Manifesto, these 4 key values. There's a lot of principles behind it, but really it's about individuals' interactions, working stuff. It started off with working software, but now Agile's being used everywhere. You have something you need to produce. Well, that thing you're producing should have more priority over, let's say, documentation about that thing, because many times that documentation may not be read or used or helpful, may fall out of date, and the worst thing you can have is documentation information that falls out of date. But what we really want to do is get to the working stuff as soon as possible. It's about collaborating with the people who sponsor our work, who are the consumers of our work. And then it's about being a responder to change. You need a plan, got to always have a plan, but change is endemic in the universe. And therefore, we want to optimize around change rather than rigidly following a plan. So that was a real nutshell of what we talked about in part 1. Keep that in mind as we go into these, because what we're going to talk about is some of the what's and how's. It's more important to be Lean Agile than do Lean Agile. And when we get down into the actual academic examples of that, you're going to see that we've adapted many things that we do in industry to academia because it's unique in its practices, in its applications. But still, at the end of the day, you can be Lean Agile and do it differently. All right, so understanding that all work is work, all projects, I mean, whether it be in industry or academia, it's work. You start with a big idea and you need to break it down into doable tasks and tasks that you can focus on and deliver and in Agile in a short period of time, so you can get the learning from that as soon as possible. So breaking it down into what we call releasable or consumable elements, and then the tasks that support that is what we're going to be focusing on here. So in Agile, in industry, we'll talk about epics, features, and stories. Epics is the big idea. In your world, it might be that the idea for the
for your thesis.
Dissertation proposal.
Yeah, like, for your proposal, yeah.
The research idea. It may be something where a sponsor has come and they want to fund a grant for work, and they have very kind of a specific idea of what it is you want to pursue. Like, for instance, you may get a grant from USDA.
Or the Navy will sponsor like swimming robot research. Yeah. Exactly.
So, research can come in a number of different forms, but you have a customer. Sometimes that customer is you. If you are a graduate student, you have a specific end in mind. This research, doctoral research journey is your vehicle. It's your boat on the value stream that's going to take you to your PhD, and then take you to your postdoctoral work, and then hopefully take you to wherever it is you go.
Industry, faculty jobs,
anywhere,
all over the place.
anywhere. Yeah. And it's the skills that you pick up along the way that you acquire. It's not just the end product. So understand that very often you've got to recognize yourself as a customer if you're going to make what you do sustainable, valuable, and that you be motivated by it. Because
I also like them because one of the manifesto statements is customer delight. So you should be delighting yourself along the way.
If you are doing your work, then you need to be motivated in it, because that will bring out the best in you. So underneath epics, what we can't do is we can't work on the whole thing all at the same time. Say, how do you eat the elephant, right? And the answer is one bite at a time. So how do you eat the whatever? You got to break it down. You got to figure out a place to start, and we call those features in Agile. And those are those releasable portions. It may be the proposal itself. It may be the design for the plan for the field study. It could be the methodologies or research practices you want to use. But these are things that you need to get out there for you to be able to ladder those up and support the big idea.
So the releasable chunk of value, it doesn't have to be a grandiose thing. It could just be like, here's my plan.
It could be a few days of work.
Okay. Because I think
Or
sometimes
it could be a few weeks of work, or it could be even, a month or so. But what you want to do is small is beautiful in Agile. So you want to get to the release of something that can be evaluated in terms of its value proposition to the big idea sooner than later.
I think we can get hung up on like, well, is this valuable enough, or is this enough to show? And we lose track of, well, like, what's it to the relation to the big project, that value part. And yeah.
The bigger the feature, the more you're going to be prone to analysis paralysis. If you're
Okay.
at all like me, I'm a procrastinator. The best way to get me off the fence is to break something down into something I can see it's doable, but it's not just work. It's actually something I feel like I can cross the finish line and say, yeah, got that done. Felt good. Let's go do it again. The bigger the thing that you try to go tackle, the more opportunities you have for despair.
Yeah.
And feeling overwhelmed. And your sense of knowing you don't know everything that's in there. The smaller the target, the more visibility. And then you do the double click on that, and there's fewer things in it to be overwhelmed by. And you do the double click, and you can get down into the individual tasks. So don't tackle things that are too big. Logically break them down, and you have a process already to do that with. So getting to mapping what you do in your world to epics features, and then what we call user stories, is a process that you should be able to perform. By the way, in the workshop that we will be doing later on, we're actually going to take you down through the path of what is your epic, what is your feature, what is your story, and getting you kind of hands-on, and not going to do everything, but we're going to get you enough practice thinking this way that you're going to be able to break things down into the individual stories, which are essentially the small units of work that support your feature. So stories are children of features, features are children of epics. And you can create whatever ladder you want, but just understand at the end of the day, we're trying to break work down into chunks, daily chunks, or every few days, or a chunk maybe a week. But it's something we can focus on, something we realize, something we can cross the finish line and get the learning out of it. Because until we get the learning, we really don't know if we're headed in the best direction, in the best way possible. And we also want to compress the timeline. And we can do that by applying this type of work breakdown methodology to Lean Agile values and principles. So a little bit more on epics. Epics can be, a few months, a few quarters, actually a few years. So, and epics can report to super epics. So you can keep the work breakdown going. The bigger that something is, and the more multi-year it is, usually you have to simplify what it is you're talking about. And you get more detail as you break down the components. So you may have year 1, year 2, year 3, but what's in year 1? What's in year 2? What's in year 3? And then out of those, again, get down to your features, which are going to, in industry, are specific services of a product. Your product could be your dissertation, could be your research, that fulfill the needs that you're doing it for. And in this case, we call that a user. We'll talk about users in a little bit more. So we need to express it somehow in a short encapsulated phrase. That's what features. We won't create a tome of description for it. We need to be able to abbreviate it into 1 or 2 through maybe 3 sentences and express its value in terms of its desired benefits. Why are you doing this? Every feature needs to have a why to it. In fact, pretty much everything we do needs to have a why. Why are we spending our precious time and resource on anything. We should be aware at all times of the value of our lives and what we apply it to. Same thing with our work. So whether we talk about an epic or a feature or a story, you'll see that they're all value focused. Then we take these features and we put them in a stack and we define them out. We prioritize them because you're not going to do everything at the same time. So you have to look at what's the bang for the buck of the next thing you do, how you apply your resource. And we maintain, in industry, we call this a program backlog. And you can see here we have a program backlog that has a bunch of features reporting to a solution level backlog that has capabilities in it. And it reports to a portfolio. So this is like the enterprise. Big corporations have these multi-year initiatives. Let's say you're trying to move towards green or sustainable forms of energy for your factories. And that's going to be multi-years. That's going to be up at that portfolio level. And then you need to develop certain kinds of capabilities that your plants are going to need, even just getting the energy hooked up in there if you're not doing it on site. And then you're going to have the things that you're going to be doing, quarter by quarter, month by month to enable that, to make it happen. And then all the tasks, all the work reporting to it. And then we have, go ahead.
Would you create a workflow like this before you even start the project? And then you would revisit and edit the features and stories as new data comes up?
So you would create a scaffolding with a lot of TBDs, placeholders, right? And you start filling this out. What you might do is have your epic, take one capability, take one or two features, then take the stories for it. Okay. And you try to create a full slice down. So you begin doing something that will help validate the hypothesis at every level. And then
figure out if you should be going anyway, or if you should change the epic. Yeah.
So we've got these blue, what I call blue bricks and red bricks there. The red bricks are enablers. For instance, your lab is an enabler. It's not the product. The microscopes aren't the product, but you have to be able to staff people, staff a lab. You may need to actually build a platform for doing data acquisition and data analysis. It's also not the product, but there are things that you need to do in order to do things that you need to do to hit the end goal, the big idea, the conclusion at the end of your research project. So it's important that you identify what those things that support your research, but are not the research. And those things that are the research, and then identify the dependencies. That's going to help you sequence as well the work that you do and identify what's important. Now, some people want to get all the red brick stuff done first. It's like, no, just get the red brick stuff done to move to the next most important, valuable outcome. If you have to do a lot, then do a lot. But even then, attack it in a epic feature story kind of progression. So you're breaking down, you're going to build part of the lab. Part of the lab that needs to be built first is this stuff. So there's some ideas for you. We'll come back to that later. And again, user stories are children of features. They are basically your small units of work that you can put into a backlog, a queue, and then pull from that and bring it into your plate. Don't put more on your plate than you can fit, that are prioritized, basically shadowing the priority of the features. So however you've prioritized the features, the stories will inherit that property, will inherit the prioritization of it, but you may need to do some sequencing work down there as well. We keep stories in what we call a team backlog. Again, features go in a program backlog. How you adapt that to your research environment, that's part of the thing that you'll have to figure out. And we could talk about it during the workshop. The user story are containers for work level customer value, user customer value, and they come in this format. As a user role, I'm going to do some sort of activity so that I can get value out of it. And a user role can be a person, could be a device, could be a system, could be a bug, could be a tree, could be an organization, could be somebody reading your paper. It is the target, is the who of the whole thing. The activity is basically what's going on. What's the activity? That's the what. And then the business value is, or just the value is the why of the activity. You know, I want to have a data table or a table in the lab that tells me where all the reagents are of certain types, so that I may go and find the reagent that I need quickly. That's there you go. So as a person who works in the lab, I want to be able to access, you know, an inventory sheet that tells me exactly what reagents are where. And then you may add things like, how old is that reagent, right? What's the size of the reagent? What's its next reorder point? We'll talk about lab management later on when we talk about Agile in academia. So here's some generic examples from industry. So there's this user called a fleet driver. So it could be an Amazon driver, it could be anybody doing corporate truck work. So as a fleet driver, I want to limit the amount of money before I fuel so I can control my expenditure. And remember in the old days, like when I was young, we didn't have that kind of system. We would have to go in and pay or fuel up, but there was no way of really limiting the amount of money in any automated way. So this is a new thing. So there you have the fleet driver, you have the activity, and you have the value. They want to control their expenditure. Again, here's the fleet driver. They want to get a receipt after fueling so they can expense the purchase. The value, the why, I want to expense the purchase. Oh, I guess I have to have a receipt for that because finance requires it. And as the finance department, they only want to print receipts for, this is the gas station, print receipts for drivers who request them, so they save on paper. So there's this whole idea again of who, what, and why. You want to, whenever you're doing task definition, you want to define your
brief technical difficulty, save on paper.
Save on paper. So this is just an example of a different user, a different who, a different what, and their whys. They want to save paper because they're trying to reduce the expenses of the company so that only that money and resources that need to be used are used in pursuit of the goal. So in the same way, you are going to have things you need to do. Identify who, identify the what, and identify the why. And the why of the why is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
And I think this breaks down to even small daily tasks of like, I need, as a, like you need to open this document because you want to start writing the analysis of this work. Or that feels, sometimes I just start with opening a document to get a cascade of other smaller tasks.
Sometimes we're on autopilot, and sometimes we just do because we feel like we need to be doing.
Yeah.
But just because you can doesn't mean you should necessarily should. And so just as a mental model, before you begin doing any work that takes more than just a few minutes, you should look at your day, understand you have so much capacity to give to it. And that you should understand, why am I doing this? And is this leading to the end that I need? And is this the best use of my time in the next hour? And so when you're, spending an extra few minutes doom scrolling through Google News, you have to ask yourself, is this the best use of my time, or should I allocate that time to something more productive and valuable that I actually maybe can do something about? So the who, the what, the why. And just to kind of give you guys an example that everybody can relate to, I just had a birthday. And the hypothesis, and so a lot of times epics, well, not a lot of times, all epics should have hypotheses. And this is a format that helps you describe in basically one sentence what your hypothesis is about. We use this in industry all the time. So for Doug, who for his birthday celebration, the event, is a celebration that delivers everything he wants in a birthday. Unlike last year, which was a disaster, our event does not include a clown and has personalized gifts no gift cards. Now, the key benefit is that Doug feels appreciated, loved, and particularly honored. The indicators of success is he laughs, he smiles, and you're invited back for next year's party. So that's the epic. What might the features be? Well, Doug likes carrot cake. He loves carrot cake. Now, carrot cake is a key feature, as long as decorations, candles and songs, cards of personalized presents, and again, no clown, I mean it. So let's just take a look at the carrot cake. We've got a short description here. Doug's cake is to be a medium-sized, 3-layer diameter, I should say 12-inch diameter carrot cake with frosting and the words, "Happy Birthday, Doug," written in green icing on top. Enough for 12 people, no red dye. He's allergic to it. Now, the key benefit is Doug loves a well-executed carrot cake, and it is a suitable platform for burning, in my case, dozens of candles. In fact, I think I have to take out
24, right?
Yeah, no, I have to actually take out a burn permit every time I have a birthday. Key indicators of success, he asks for seconds, asks if you're going to finish your piece, and then takes the rest of the cake home. And the user stories for it are unique cake layers, cake frosting, message icing, assembled cake, and a message on the cake. Now, notice we're getting more specific as we go down and we break this down.
Yeah,
And
if
it
you were
gives us-
really this specific, your children might have something to say about.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm even going, the cake layers dense like banana bread, white frosting, but not too sweet, green icing enough for 20 letters. You know, and I actually looked, you know, happy birthday, you know, Doug, you know, how many letters that would take. And actually, I want the font to be very specific because I'm kind of picky about those things. Actually not, but I just thought I'd put, but every user story has a acceptability criteria. That is, how do you know you're done, right? What's the definition of done? How do you know you've crossed the finish line? Because the idea is if you execute these user stories correctly and you put them all assembled together, you're going to have a carrot cake that meets the intent of what Doug wanted in a carrot cake. And then Doug will be happy and he will love you to death. So this is an example, very simple, but in the same way, how does this map to your world? And when you're looking at big things, whether it has to do with work, whether it has to do with research, whether it has to do with kind of anything, this methodology helps you break it down and make sure that when you look at the hypothesis, the things that you don't get so busy in the doing that you miss the hypothesis. And so constantly as we're doing this, we're checking back in. Now, in an academic example, it could be a doctoral study on something.
Dragonfly wing flexibility.
You know, for X, who X, my X is a research study that delivers X, unlike previous work, which my study will XXX. And your key benefit could have a phrase of determine whether, or categorize new, or provide a solution which. You know, the indicators of success could be acceptance of a thesis, recognition by peers of the value of your work, skills attained during the journey, publication in a tier 1 journal, award of a postdoctoral grant. You need to know why this big idea is important and what the payoff and what the desired benefits are. Features, research proposal, literature review, field study, data analysis, those are your chunks. Those are your, now you could actually break these features down into sub features. Down to the point where you've got actual workable work to go do. If it's the research proposal, you want it to be a lightweight plan for your research journey and not a tome, not Tolstoy. You want to get enough to go do some work to validate whether the hypothesis direction you're heading is the correct one. And we call that a minimum viable product. You could call it anything you want, but the idea is that we have so much time, so much money, availability, resources. We need to use that in an extremely efficient fashion to get back the data that we need to acquire to tell us whether we're headed the right direction or not. That's why we want a lightweight plan. And again, indicators of success, acceptance of the plan, skills gained, yada, yada. And then user stories might be an outline, draft 1, draft 2, or it could be draft 1 of this section of the outline. however you want to break it down, into something that you can realize within a few days, certainly less than a week or two. Something that where the finish line is close, proximate. You can have some urgency around it. You also can see the finish line so you don't despair or become overwhelmed. And that you don't put too much on your plate at any one time. Okay, let's talk about some of the work practices as individuals and teams that we can use to get there. So one thing I just wanted to introduce you to is what we call the planning onion. The planning onion always starts off with a vision. When you start a doctoral journey, you have this vision in mind of the future and what area you may want to be working in. Then you start thinking about a roadmap of how to get there. Then you think about the chunks of releasable value that build to your epic. So your vision is usually aligned, related to your epic, but the vision can be broader than the epic. It can be 10, 15 years down the road, right? You see yourself doing these things. The roadmap's going to look more in the next, year to 2 years, things that you're going to actually be working on in that period of time. And then within that, what are all the releasable chunks of value that you need to perform over that time that supports the roadmap? And then what are you doing in the next week or two, right? What are you doing in the next week or two that's going to support the release plan, where you support those features going out? And then what are you doing today? What's your own little personal sticky notes say that you should be working on today and tomorrow, and keep that locus of focus. So that's the planning onion.
I like that you just said locus and focus, because I would interpret that as locust.
Oh,
and that's a pretty good motto for me, since I study locusts.
That really bugs me, Mary.
Well, I'm just winging it.
Oh, there's my daughter. Okay, so you'll hear a lot about Scrum and Agile, and there's a lot of people who just implement the practices, ceremonies, workflow of Scrum without understanding that there's some theory and principles behind it too. And it's about transparency, it's about inspecting, it's about adaptation, it's about knowing what's going on, checking our work as we do it, and it's okay, in fact, encouraged to change tactical direction. It's a model of empiricism, right? We know what we're going to go after. We're looking at what we do, and we adapt around it. Another process is called plan, do, check, act, or adjust, Pdca. And that is actually derived from the scientific method. So this should be somewhat familiar to folks. So I want to see all the work. And if I'm working with other people, we all want to see the work that each other is doing, so we can see the interconnectedness and take advantage of that and make sure we're sequencing our work. Anyone who's involved needs to see the work. We don't hide our work under a basket. We want to do timely checks on our progress towards goal, our plan versus actual, and knowing, are we getting to done? Let's recheck what done meant. Do we need to change our definition of done here? And finally, based on those timely checks, we want to make sure that what we're doing is in the guardrails of where we need to go. And if for some reason we have a data point out here outside our guardrails, don't ignore it. Maybe that's telling you your guardrails need to change, or your guardrails need to be widened. One thing about anomalous information when you're doing work is sometimes the universe is telling you something. You may not want to hear it, but it's trying many times to tell you something that you may need to pivot. You may need to adjust and adapt around the information and the experience that you're having.
Like if you're inspecting, and then this has happened to me, and things are not getting done because I'm focused on too many things.
The locus of your focus, the smaller that it is, it's going to be easier to see confirming data, but also it's going to be easier to see anomalous data. Right?
Yeah.
So there's some values of Scrums, and this is something everyone could understand. But the top one is courage. It's about doing the right thing, working on tough problems, having the courage to go to overcome your feeling of being overwhelmed or fear of not knowing. And in the graduate student world, there's a whole lot you don't know. In fact, it's like everything. And you are courageous people, graduate students. And being of research science is also courageous. You're venturing into the unknown, into the darkness, and you're trying to do the right thing. Doing things the right way is important, but it's more important that you do the right thing, and that takes courage in any situation, whether that be in research, in industry, at home, in society. Do the right thing. Focus. We already talked about how important focus is, but that you are committed to your focus for at least for a period of time to be able to extract the data that you need to determine whether what you're doing is leading you in the right direction. And then respect. People do all the work, and if you're in community, and by the way, all work gets done in community. No, I'm an individual researcher. Yeah, there's a guy who cleans up the lab. There's a person who calibrates your instruments. There's a person who a
librarian who helps you find your texts. They're part of the community.
Exactly. And you're a graduate student, you're using undergraduate students to help you do your research, you do field studies. Respect them. Respect them. And see them as capable, independent people who are going to bring value to what you do because you value them. And you want them to be motivated. That was one of the Agile principles, is build your work around motivated individuals. And a key of motivation is whether I feel respect. And then openness. And we need to be open about all the work. This is the transparency thing, but also openness to talking about it. Let's not be defensive. In the scientific community, you challenge everything. And that is so positive that you bring that. But an openness along with respect.
There we go.
Along with courage. Let's focus on the problem, not people. And let's stay committed to the goal. When people are aligned with the why of what you're doing, then all of this pulls together and pulls in the same direction instead of pulling apart. So let's talk a bit about mechanics of the Scrum cycle. So this is a lot, so I'm going to walk you through it. It starts off with a backlog, which is all the work at the user story level that we need to do. We're going to prioritize that and define it more in something called the Team Backlog. Basically our priority, it's our to-do list, but written in a way that everything in there is clearly defined and achievable, and we'll know what done looks like. And then for the next day or a week or 2 weeks or whatever, we're going to take some of that backlog and pull it onto our plate. This is what we're going to go eat. And that's called sprint planning. The whole idea about sprinting is you run fast because you know what's in front of you. It's all doable. You've sized it. You've got everything ready to go for it, and you're not going to waver. You're going to sprint hard, and you're going to get there, and then you're going to stop because it's not a marathon. The marathon is a series of sprints, because at every sprint, and we'll talk about it, we're going to go evaluate. So you got sprint planning.
How long is a sprint?
It can vary from being a week to being 2 months in some cases.
Oh, okay.
It can be whatever is appropriate to your work cycle. So I take teams that are used to do Waterfall, and they do a design, build, test, and then deploy cycle. And they maybe are only doing releases every 3 months, and I'll put them into a 4-week sprint cycle.
Okay.
Where they do those things, but then at some point I'll take them down to a 2-week sprint cycle. In industry, 2 weeks is the standard, but that's for software development. That may not be appropriate to what you're doing unless you're doing software development as part of your research. But generally speaking, it's enough. It's an appropriate period of time for you able to do enough of the user story work for you to get someplace, and then kind of like demonstrate to yourself and others, hey, here's where we are, here's what we learned, and now let's go pull more stuff out of the team backlog to go work on next. And this sometimes teams will start off with a longer sprint period, and then as they become better, they squeeze it down.
That's what I was about to ask, because I think sometimes a graduate student or postdoc doesn't know how long a specific task might take. And so you're like,
so give yourself room up front, and the freedom to adjust your process. That is, processes should serve the people who are doing the work, not the other way around.
Yeah, so I shouldn't give myself a day when really I could say 2 weeks for this task is reasonable.
And you're going to be doing more than one task, right? But you don't want to be doing too many tasks at the same time.
Right.
Sometimes you need a brain break, right? You switch to this thing instead of that thing. But what's the finish line you want to cross? If it's going to take more than a couple of weeks, you really want to ask yourself, do you need to break this apart into 2 pieces so you can cross the finish line on a piece of it, get that learning done, and then do the next piece? Give yourself some feeling of flow, of progress. And that's why, when we're doing individual work, I don't like to see stories that take more than about a week or so, because I can break down the work into subpart A, subpart B, and subpart C, so I can evaluate it. I can cross the finish line. It comforts my tendency to procrastinate because I'm a perfectionist. If I don't think I can do it all perfect, then I'll put it off. But if I can just think I can just get this piece of it done as well as I can, and it isn't as daunting, then I'll get that done. Then I'll move the next thing. Then I'll move the next thing. I need to get all 3 pieces done, but breaking it down. That's why the sprint cycle in the industry, we use 2 weeks because it time boxes you. And it says, okay, you got to break things down such they reasonably can be done in this period of time. It's a forcing function that forces you to break down the work into smaller pieces. The bigger work expands to the time allocated to it. You may have heard that. So the longer the sprint cycle I have, the more inefficient that process will be. It'll take longer for me to learn something I need to learn. So we try to optimize it down to a point where we don't get silly about it. But a couple weeks is, for most teams at the point of maturity, a good balance. Okay, let's keep going here. That's why we have our sprint backlog, and then we sprint. We run hard, the team works together, you work. And then what we do is we come up for error periodically. Now in industry, normally that's every day. They do a daily stand-up where they say, okay, what I do yesterday, this is what I did yesterday, guys. This is what I'm doing today. And here's any impediments or blockers or challenges or aha moments, findings, learnings. And then if we need to meet after, then we schedule time to talk about it in more depth. But this is where the transparency comes in. Everybody sees what you're doing. Now, if you're doing this along with what we'll show you a Kanban board, everybody can see all the work. They can see the flow. They can see who's stuck. One thing in Agile and in Scrum is everybody crosses the finish line or nobody does. The whole idea of commitment to team goals becomes preeminent, and I may go help you. I may get my stuff done, or I may take some time out from what I'm doing to go help you. There is a very much a feeling of cadre in Agile Scrum. So from there, we got finished work at the end of the sprint cycle. We can take a look at it, then we can review what we did, see if it met the goals, see what we learned. And then we actually do a retrospective, a reflection, not just of the work, actually more importantly, we retro on the process. We talk about the things that impeded us, the things that didn't go right, the things that did go right. And we kind of like, okay, what worked well? What didn't work so well? What could we improve? And then we apply that to the cycle, and that's a team event. In this whole thing, we have some people who are helping us direct the work, and that's a product owner. We call those product owners in industry. Now, in academia, that could be a project manager, could be your principal lead, or somebody else who's in a project authority capacity. We also have a Scrum Master, and this is out of order, but the Scrum Master can be a team member, a project manager, or in some cases, the principal lead, but they facilitate things. They're the ones to make sure that the right conversations are happening at the right time with the right people, and people are supported in the performance of their work. So this could be an advisor as well, but they need to be close enough to the work that they can be there on a, throughout the week, points along the week, that they can help the team over its impediments. The team in industry is anywhere from 3 to 11 people. The sweet spot is 5 to 7. And this has been around actually, ever since the early 90s, but really caught fame in the early 2000s. It is used heavily in industry. We'll show where it's being used in academia later. The other work practice that's used sometimes in conjunction with Scrum is Kanban. And Kanban is all about visualizing your work process, limiting what you're working on at any one time, managing flow to get optimal flow out of it that is getting stuff done, having explicit policies about the stages of the work, entrance and exit criteria, getting fast feedback loops established, and then evolving and improving your process. That's the retrospective. So there's many things that map directly from here into Scrum. And so I actually have all my teams in doing their work from the team backlog through getting it done. I actually have them do this, and you'll see how this works here, which is we have the backlog, we have our to-dos for the next sprint, we're in development, then when we're done developing, we're going to test it, we're going to deploy it, and then we're done. So this is a Kanban because it's staged workflow. The other thing is those red numbers, those limit the amount of things that I can have in any one stage. So it forces me to focus. So if I have a hard time, not doing 10 things at a time, by the way, I like to multiplex. But every time I do, there's this thing called context switching. And I can lose 20% of my productive capability. I can hemorrhage my own capacity to do good. Unless I have these helpful numbers that says, Doug, you can only do 3 things at a time. Out of your backlog, you can work on 3 user stories. You get to pick which 3, but until you get one of those done, you can't pull another one out of the backlog.
What about when you have, like, besides your projects, you have other roles like mentoring students, teaching a course, grant writing on top of like trying to get a couple research projects?
What you can do is you can stack these, right? You can have one that says, here's your grant writing. Here's this swim lane, or this, what we call them value streams. Here's your research. Here's your multidisciplinary research. Here's your grant study. Here's the students that you're mentoring. Here's your teaching. Okay. But at the end of the day, when you add all those up, they got to meet your capacity. And this is where you get overwhelmed. Unless you have visibility, unless you visualize where you are, you're going to become overwhelmed pretty quickly.
So it's common to have multiple Kanban boards.
If you are a multi-team individual, right? Now understanding these are essentially attributes of your Kanban board, but it's helpful to put these in swim lanes sometimes. So you can then prioritize what you do on a particular day, moving things left to right, but it also makes you mindful that you serve multiple masters. You're a servant of many things. That's a better way to put it, okay? You're a servant to many things. You're a servant to yourself. You're a servant to other people. You're a servant to requests that come in. And so you need to visualize everything that's going on. And the first time you do it, it will scare the piddle out of you. You kind of go, well, that explains a few things. And so put together, I use stickies. I put them left to right. I put them, I get an idea, I stick it up here. Then I figure out which particular swim lane it goes in and when does it need to be actionable? Is there a due date associated? Is it just a backlog item? Do I need to prioritize it later? And what it keeps me doing is asking that question, why? Why am I doing that? And what's the best use of my time today, tomorrow, this next week? What are the things that are going to literally eat me alive if I don't attend to today? And when you look at all the things that you can do, you have to prioritize. And this is where you may have to understand that there's just not enough of you to go around. And so out of all those swim lanes, what you may have to do is decide, make decisions about how you're going to do it. Otherwise, you'll pinball your way around it and really not get anywhere on anything until it's too late. And then you crash and burn, and then you work 100 hours a week for a month. That sounds like an end of a graduate, thesis period. Never seen that happen before.
Sounds like a lot of academics I know.
And a lot of projects out in industry as well, by the way. Okay, so let's keep going on this. What I like to do is finish up talking about the traction, applications of Agile in academia. And first of all, I wanted to pay tribute to the Broad. They do over 1,000 publications a year. They have over 1,300 employees. They got over 30 labs. And there was this person, Kendra West, who was a student going through there, decided she wasn't going to be a scientist in the biology degree that she got. She pivoted, and now she helps people in academia do things better, faster, with less effort. And you'll see these footnotes at the end. All of these I have references to. You can read about these. But they implemented Scrum Agile teams very much very close to the lines that I've talked to you about today. And they used Agile coaches. They have Agile coaches at the Broad. And then they instituted Agile Academia affinity groups. We call these communities of practice. Because regardless if you're just a single person over here, there's single persons like you all over your institution and across institutions. And so at the Broad, they actually get people together and says, how can I do this better, faster, with less effort? Because you know what? Everybody, all those individuals, you all got the same kinds of issues, the same kinds of work, the same concerns and the same desires. And what you find is that in that diversity of all of you, you come up with things that you all take away that are valued. And then you also realize you're not alone. And that people do all the work, and you can learn from people doing their work, and they can learn from you. And so it's a very cool thing that they've done. And they've been doing this now for a few years. So talked about communities of practice, the affinity group. And so they're continuing on with that. You can read more about it. You probably got some friends over at the Broad, and they can share you some of, because they also have a blog, they have a resource center, got awesome things going, and a great Lean Agile community.
We'll have all of these resources linked in the caption below the video.
There you go. Then there's Lean Research over at MIT D-Lab and Tufts Fletcher. There's this kind of like, we had the Agile Manifesto. Well, they came up with something similar. They said there's this declaration, you actually read it and sign it. It's a call for rigorous, respectful, relevant, and right-sized research. Somebody likes ours in international development. But this is serious stuff. What their goals are is to increase the quality of information gathered through research, to improve the usefulness of research finding for stakeholders, and enable both the research process and outputs to benefit study subjects and their communities. That is, we just don't go in and harvest information out of an international community and it be left in the same state it was before.
Or we don't even share that information with them.
Or share it back. It's, dare I say, a bit like intellectual colonialism.
It is.
So this was, people have been aware of this for a long time, but enough people in MIT, D-Lab, and Tufts Fletcher said, hey, let's do something about it. So their thing is how we conduct research matters. And understanding research is a development activity. The power and social dynamics influence our research results. And disrespectful, irrelevant, and inefficient research is too common. So applying things like lean principles and, dare I say, doing other things like Agile, Scrum, whatever, that supports the declaration of lean research. I have 3 different things you can read on it. And I would, now this is for international development. Maybe it should be for other kinds of development too. When I read this stuff, it's kind of like, yeah, this works. So I commend this to your attention. Talked about the lab management for, there's this thing called the 5S process, and it actually started at Toyota Production Systems decades ago. I used to be a manufacturing engineer, so a lot of this stuff is near and dear to my heart. But the 5S's is sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and then sustain. And sort means basically separates what is unnecessary. Put the things that you need the most closest to the people who need it to do the work that they do. That is a human-centric approach to organizing your labs, sometimes your office. Set in order, organize it, so that if it follows a particular sequence, let's say of genome sequencing, or you're using certain types of reagents and
Or
things like that.
file order, even like.
This is where ergonomics get into play as well. Keep it clean as you go. For any number of reasons, safety, but also your results. Also, it orders the mind. There's sociological studies that show that a lot of times your environment reflects your mind, but your mind reflects your environment. So by cleaning things up, it will help you stay focused. And then the other thing is that when we're using this in conjunction with a Kanban, it's a lot easier to see that something's done because you actually did the cleanup. That means that we're done. Standardize, that is, wherever possible, establish standard operating procedures to increase not only consistency and continuity, but it's easier to onboard people. Let's say undergraduate students or graduate students, plus things that are done in one lab versus another lab where you may be using different labs and collaborating together. You're not going to be using different procedures that actually may affect your research results. And then rinse and repeat. Develop long-lasting habits that become part of the culture of the lab. And by the way, things like respect, things like communication, things like collaboration begin to layer on this. And so the whole idea is this environment is an environment where you can be productive, consistent, sustainable, evolutionary, and therefore revolutionary work. And the benefits you can obviously see where the benefits would be here. Talked about some of them. There's many. And so, again, I commend this reading, and this is something you could probably start doing in your lab tomorrow. All right, so there's this paper out of Pace University where they actually rejiggered their doctoral research around Agile methods. And they came out this paper and they said, here's how we used to do it. Here's how we're doing it as Agile. So let's say the dissertation methodology. What they do is that dissertations are designed briefly and evolve over the lifetime of the document. They have regular, that is check-ins, frequent iterations that ensure the product, that is the dissertation proposal, is of high quality and eliminates waste. It's focused, it's lensed. Dissertation development, the DPS candidate can work with both an advisor, input from other DPS students and teachers and colleagues. And the scope, the idea paper is created using an Agile iterative methodology to deliver a working idea paper frequently and at a sustainable pace. That is, rather than the big, huge thing at the end, they chop it up, right? And then it gives you the ability to get feedback and adjust as you go. Now, these are some of the things I just put down at the bottom, referring back to things I've talked about earlier. And they're really focused on these 6 principles, which is, early and continuous delivery. And I inserted the words dissertation product, welcoming changing requirements even late in the research process, delivering working dissertation product frequently, measuring progress primarily through useful research deliverables, using agile processes for sustainable research, enabling sponsors, researchers, and other team members to maintain a constant pace indefinitely, and valuing simplicity as the art of maximizing the work not done. So that's, they actually, and then what they showed was they were actually able to shave a year or two off the normal doctoral end-to-end process.
What?
It goes faster. Rather than needing 5 to 7 years, they're doing the same thing in 3 to 5 years. So they're knocking a couple of years off of it. But you can see that if you eliminate the waste, if you learn earlier that what you didn't know till later, you're going to be more efficient and effective with the research that you do. You should come to your conclusion sooner with a better product. That is kind of like the conclusion they reached, and that if you were to do this, you might reach as well.
I'm really curious about how they did that. I'm gonna go read that paper in depth.
It's now they actually, again, they rejiggered their program, and I will say that they this was done using people who had some amount of professional experience, and so they kind of came in with some methodologies already adopted, or at least work rigors. One of the recommendations is that if you're going to use, go directly from undergraduate to graduate, there should be some sort of a boot camp where many of the skills that you might acquire out in industry can be fast-tracked into the heads and the hearts of your.
What just off the top of your head, like 2 skills from industry that you would say could be a useful boot camp for undergrad to graduate, if it's like they're doing direct?
Well, one is collaboration. When you're an undergraduate, everybody hates group studies. And in business, out in industry, collaboration is the thing. You learn how to work with people towards a goal in teams on a daily basis, and the communication, the collaboration, the diversity, the respect, the culture, I don't have to necessarily like you, but I have to work with you.
But actually that's advice I would give first grad year Mary. I would say find outside mentors, not because the mentors you have in grad school aren't good, but just to give an outside grounding perspective outside of your own stressors.
Right.
I would have said that.
The other thing is needing to respond to urgencies. You're just the dynamics of a industrial or private industry work environment, and how to pivot, and the need to, you'll go in a direction, and all of a sudden somebody tells you drop it, we're going here, or it's like, and you have to divorce yourself from your preconceptions of
pain that you put into that thing, and you're like, drop it.
And you become much closer to this whole thing of customer centricity. Who's your customer? And when you're an undergraduate, you're the customer. Now, your professor would like you to believe that he's the customer, and actually you start doing a lot better on your test when you get in the head of your customer, that is your professor. But the fact of the matter is that out in the work world, a customer is whoever receives your work, whoever is, and everybody's doing that.
It's your PI.
So these are things that and this is why internships, by the way, are so important. I recommend internships as undergraduates tremendously, because it can give you that leg up, and you should be able to enter your graduate experience with some of this knowledge. So I would actually delay my graduation date as an undergraduate to put it in 2 6-month internships, because you're going to need it and you're going to be more successful.
Or sometimes too, graduate students in their first summer, it's like, if you talk to your advisor, you could potentially work in an internship either before your first year starts or right after your first year starts.
Exactly.
Especially if you're interested in pursuing, say, environmental policy after your PhD or master's, those kinds of things.
Right. And there's work outside of academia too.
Yeah.
So you can do internships at, let's say, Moderna or Fred Hutchinson Center. in Seattle, or, Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, or, there's lots of research going on in lots of different places, and your ability to find a home is going to be partly dependent on your ability to fit into that culture.
And navigate LinkedIn.
Yeah, at University of Maryland, they adapted the Scrum methodology. By the way, when I say they, it wasn't the students, it was the advisors who wanted to make more efficient use of their time and serve their students better. So what they did is they started having three a week Scrum meetings. It was 15 minutes of status with a 10-minute optional meet after to talk about things that came up in that. But there's, again, very much that daily stand-up that I talked about before. And then out of that, they would schedule on-demand technical meetings on an exception-oriented basis. So it could be a one-on-one for a student, or it could be a group of students who were struggling with the same thing, or were interdependent with each other. And they would also use these to do activity planning. That is, this is where they would select the things they would do for their sprint backlog. So we're going to try to accomplish these things over the next week or two. They would pose research questions, talk about methods, talk about technical challenges. They would be visible to the work. They would talk about how they would get that work done. And they didn't do a lot of the other types of things, but these on-demand technical meetings served the whole process of Scrum as well. They just spun them up as they needed them. And they're still on their journey of adapting this out. But the professors said, this is wonderful. Now I know I'm spending my time on the things that most matter to my students. And I feel like I am, that they are getting the most out of their time. And so the actual office hours are still there, but when people drop in, they're more focused. They're coming in with a question. And usually those are also then scheduled. So they're using their precious time better, and the beneficiaries of that, it's a win-win. The students win, the professors win, and they're getting more work done faster. There was this case study done at UOC that took the Scrum method, and where we talk about a product owner, they used the principal, they mapped that to the principal investigator. Instead of a daily stand-up, they did a weekly stand-up. They used a Kanban board, and as the Scrum Master, or they're focused on regular releases, but the Scrum Master was someone on the team who was recognized as having good people skills, and was the facilitator for their meetings and their events. They actually measured 8 factors that they thought were important in terms of adapting Scrum to their research process. So these 8 factors were then, they took surveys before and after, and here's what they came up with. The blue is strongly agree, the red is agree, the orange is neutral. And so you can see, first of all, this is a small sample size, but from my industrial experience, I can tell you that these numbers are right on. The Agile methods have improved communication within the group. You can see strongly agree and agree predominate. Agile methods have helped visualize the work of others. Very strongly agree and agree. Agile methods have contributed to the distribution of tasks. Less of a positive, but still quite a bit agree and strongly agree, and at least it's neutral. No one disagreed.
Yeah.
Our Agile methods, our efficiency as a team has improved.
One person didn't like it.
Yeah, if you look at this, by the way, you can see that there always is. There's a person, but see, that's the thing, is that there's diversity in it. And what you need to do is have those people seen and heard. What is it about this that bothers them? Usually there's either a bad experience, but it's also understanding that you always have diverse people. Not everybody will agree, but you agree to support. And as a team, you move forward. So this last one here, Agile methods have given more quality to the work developed. and there's that one person, but everybody else is saying, well, it either hasn't affected me, or yeah, actually it has affected me. And those might be, for instance, people who are dependent on other people's work. Then final graphs, agile methods have significantly promoted transparency. I think that's pretty much strong yes. Agile methods have generated trust among the group. You can see that very strong blue. And then agile methods have generated engagement to work. That is, people started working on the things they needed to work on. Look at how strongly that agrees. So small sample size, but directionally very accurate with my experience of doing these kinds of things. And if you ever want to do this, by the way, I think that it's an opportunity for you to do your own case study. This last one is an Agile research paper by Michael Tweedale and Preben Hansen. And it is phenomenal. If there's only one thing you read out of all this, I'd like you to read this. It's applying Agile to research. And there's a lot of words here, but they're worth it. Many grant proposals and thesis proposals are written in the style of the Waterfall method, showing a nice, clear progression of steps whereby the researcher will discover something radically new in a completely unpredictable and unsurprising way. The irony is palpable. I laughed when I read that the first time. Now, however, they go hypothesis testing studies such as classic double-blind randomized controlled trial, the gold standard medical research, is a waterfall research method that necessarily involves big design up front, and that seems to have worked very well indeed. So Agile research is not the panacea to every research endeavor. Waterfall is perfectly suited to where it is perfectly suited. Agile is perfectly suited to where everything else where Waterfall's not. And so that one thing with the iterative fast learning loops is that one of the things they noted is that it may be more interest to Agile research to consider how Agile software developments have continuous learning built into them. That is, this learning occurs through making processes explicit, breaking them up into more manageable units, building in time for reflection and refactoring, retrospectives, creating a different mindset to the crisis mode that can overtake many non-Agile projects as they start to deviate from their big design upfront method.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So when you feel the drift happening in your big design that, everything was like crystalline pure at the beginning and you feel it drifting, just like, right. And by the way, their research methodology, the people they cite, seriously deep, seriously strong. Another conclusion they reach is it is least reasonable to hope that research should have a strong component of learning in it. The need for learning is particularly acute in two research scenarios. One, when the established researcher ventures into a new area, and two, when a novice researcher, such as a PhD students, undertake research. In both cases, there are many unknowns. So a big design upfront approach to research is very likely to miss something. So they remind us that graduate education, even in a research lab, can focus too much on research as an individualistic endeavor, even though research is increasingly multidisciplinary and collaborative. And this is accelerating in industry. You guys know this. An Agile approach can encourage us to think about more collaborative ways of learning research skills. And we can explore the development of additional Agile research methods tailored to meet the needs of a particular discipline, whether it be genomes or botany or whatever, a line of inquiry or a student need by asking questions like, what could you do to advance your understanding of the problem in the next week, the next day, or even the next hour? This is a mindset approach that they were really challenging people in this paper with. That might lead to a very lightweight observation or an observation of a proxy of the real item of interest, or quickly mining a literature for insights and ideas. So they give great examples.
I
Whatever
thought
the
of that. I
approach
thought like, oh, mining the literature. Maybe I just need to refresh what it says.
may be, but whatever the approach, there is a call to action, an expectation of delivery of something. It's unlikely to be profound, but something. And then a process of reflection of what to do next. This is the iterative process. So, okay, so what? One risk, they say, with agile research methods is it can look all too easy. Yeah, Doug, great, fine, wonderful. Just go off for an afternoon, look at some stuff, build some stuff, or test some stuff, and then you come back and with what you find, you'll get a PhD, right? Yeah. Just repeat that 100 times, get a PhD, right? And they say, obviously not. The learning is in the doing, and there's still lots of hard work, but the idea of you're doing this in an iterative fashion, breaking it down, using Lean-Agile methods to plan, do, check, and adjust around your work is going to help you do it better, faster, less effort. These are 3 things that they said, and I thought this was just kind of like their own manifesto. We certainly want to make the research process easier and less daunting by taking what seems to be a huge indivisible blob of work and insight and break it down into more bite-sized chunks. We want to remove the daunting sense that you need to know everything in advance so you can do big design upfront in order to discover the thing you don't know. And finally, we want to help students with methods to help them uncover a good, informative, and tractable research question, most likely by numerous iterations. And so that's where I kind of want to leave this chat, this discussion, this sharing, this airing out of ideas that I've utilized. And I think now the challenge is yours. You've heard a lot. You can do your own research. What we've got here is we will be sharing this in a PDF. So you can go check everything out that I said and more. Come to the workshop.
Yeah.
We'll dig in and see where that takes you in terms of what this might mean to where you are, even if you're halfway through, even if you're a lot of the way through your doctoral research or some project, there will be something of value that you can hopefully take away with it. I want to thank my facilitator, Mary, for stimulating thought along the way and also supporting me in all the technology. By the way, this is closed captioned, and I want to thank Mary for doing the closed captioning on it so that this is more accessible. Again, I'm Doug Salcedo. I'm here as your coach, and we'll see you around.
See you next time. Information in the caption below.